The slap echoed through the cafe, so loud it froze every spoon midair, and the quiet single dad didn't flinch. What happens next will come full circle by the end of this story, and when it does, you'll understand why kindness can be deadlier than anger. If stories that hit your heart and leave a mark matter to you, like this video and subscribe to True Kindness Tales, because this one is going to stay with you. The cafe was small, the kind of place where chipped mugs told longer stories than the people holding them, and sunlight fell in soft rectangles across worn wooden tables. Daniel Brooks sat near the window, shoulders slightly hunched, stirring a single cup of coffee he had been reheating for the third time. His jacket was old, his boots scuffed, and his eyes carried the tired patience of a man who had learned to choose peace because life had already taken enough from him. Across from him, his 8-year-old daughter Lily colored quietly, her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth as she concentrated, unaware that her father's mind was counting coins and hours and regrets all at once. The bell over the cafe door jingled, and in walked a group of loud men, laughter spilling ahead of them like something careless and sharp. At their center was Mark Harlan, expensive watch, pressed shirt, voice trained to dominate rooms without earning the right. He noticed Daniel the way predators notice stillness. The line grew slow. Someone bumped Mark's shoulder, and his irritation needed a target. His eyes landed on Daniel's worn boots under the table. "Hey," Mark snapped, loud enough for the room to hear. "This isn't a shelter by something or move." Daniel looked up calmly, a reflex he had practiced long ago in places where noise meant danger. "I have," he said softly, gesturing to the cup. Mark laughed, a brittle sound, and stepped closer. "A coffee you've been babysitting for an hour?" Lily looked up then, eyes wide. Daniel placed a steady hand over her coloring page. "It's okay," he murmured. Mark scoffed and leaned in, breath hot with arrogance. "People like you always play the victim." The words were nothing new, but the slap that followed was a sudden crack across Daniel's cheek that turned heads and silenced the room. A gasp rippled. Daniel's chair scraped back an inch, then stopped. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't shout. He only inhaled, slow and deep, like a man remembering rules written in a muscle long before kindness had become a shield. The cafe owner froze, torn between fear and duty. Lily stood, trembling. Daniel knelt to her level, ignoring the sting blooming on his face. "Sit, baby," he said gently. "Color the sun brighter." Mark smirked, mistaking restraint for weakness. "That's what I thought," he said, tossing a bill on the table like a tip for humiliation. Daniel watched him walk away, the bell jingling again, and something ancient stirred behind his eyes. Not anger, not pride, but vow he'd once made in a desert far from coffee cups and crayons. That violence would never lead his life again unless it was the only door left standing. Time stretched thin after the bell stopped ringing, and the cafe exhaled. A stranger offered napkins. Someone whispered apologies that didn't belong to them. Daniel smiled, small and grateful, and wiped his cheek. He paid and gathered Lily's things, nodding to the owner as if to say it was over. Outside, the afternoon hummed. Daniel buckled Lily into their car, hands steady, heart loud. "Daddy, why was that man mean?" she asked. Daniel paused, choosing truth without bitterness. "Sometimes people are loud because they're afraid," he said. "We don't answer fear with fear." As he closed the door, a familiar voice cut through the air, calm, authoritative. "Sir." A uniformed police officer approached, eyes sharp but respectful. "We got a call." Daniel nodded. "I won't press charges," he said before being asked. The officer studied him a second longer. "You're sure?" Daniel smiled again. "Yes." What the officer didn't know was that Daniel had once commanded teams where decisions meant life or death, where fear was a tool you learned to disarm. Years ago, Daniel Brooks had been Sergeant First Class Brooks, Delta Force, running missions that never made headlines, earning scars no one applauded. He had come home to a life that fell apart quietly, his wife gone too soon, his savings spent on hospital lights and promises. He chose a smaller world because it fit his daughter's hands. Across town, Mark Harlan was telling the story differently, boasting, laughing, adding spice to the slap like it was a trophy. Fate has a way of listening. That evening, a charity gala filled a downtown hotel, polished and bright. Mark attended to be seen. Daniel attended because the cafe owner had insisted on comping a week of breakfasts and slipped him an invitation she couldn't use. Lily wore a simple dress. Daniel wore the same jacket, cleaned and pressed with care. When Mark saw him across the room, recognition sparked, followed by annoyance. He moved to assert himself again, until the room shifted. A hush rolled like a wave as a retired general took the stage and scanned the crowd. His eyes locked on Daniel. He stepped down, crossed the room, and stood at attention. "Sergeant First Class Brooks," he said, voice carrying. "It's an honor." Whispers ignited. Mark's smile collapsed. The general spoke, a man who had pulled teammates from fire, who had refused medals he didn't think belonged to him, who had once ended a standoff without a shot because he believed restraint saved more lives than force. Daniel listened, embarrassed, eyes on Lily. "He taught us that strength is quiet," the general concluded. Mark felt the floor tilt. The slap replayed in his mind, now stripped of laughter. He pushed forward, words stumbling. Daniel turned, meeting his gaze without heat. "It's done," Daniel said softly. "Let's stay that way." The choice landed heavier than any retaliation. Mark nodded, small, and stepped back, the room watching a different kind of power at work. Morning returned to the cafe, with gentler light. Daniel and Lily sat by the window again, crayons spread like confetti. The owner brought 2 fresh coffees on the house. Outside, a man hesitated before opening the door. Mark. He looked smaller without an audience. He approached their table slowly, hands open. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice low. "For the slap. For the words. For thinking I could measure a man by his boots." Daniel studied him, weighing the future his daughter would inherit. Lily looked up, curious. "Say sorry like you mean it," she offered, earnest and disarming. Mark swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said to both of them. Daniel nodded. "Then do better," he replied. "That's how apologies work." Mark left a generous tip and walked out lighter, the bell ringing with a different sound. Daniel watched Lily color the sun brighter, just like he'd asked. He felt the quiet victory of a promise kept. To his past, to his child, to himself. Strength hadn't shouted. It had waited, listened, and chosen mercy when it could have chosen more. The cafe filled again with ordinary miracles. Steam, laughter, the clink of cups. Daniel took a sip and smiled, the circle closing where it began, with a slap that taught a room and a city what real power looks like. If this story moved you, if you believe kindness can outlast cruelty, like this video and subscribe to True Kindness Tales. More stories are waiting, and they always come back around.